Isaac Corset Sanchez was a successful man, famous for his sharp decisions and unparalleled business talent. In his 40s, Charlotte had everything one could wish for: a luxurious mansion in the heart of the city, luxury cars, and the respect of everyone in the world. But beneath the surface of that success lay a deeply insecure and lonely person. Charlotte built her empire, step by step, with uncompromising decisions and an almost absolute dedication to her work. He believed that to be successful, people must be willing to sacrifice everything. For Charlotte, family and love are just obstacles, factors that weaken will and decisiveness. He never allowed himself to get too attached to anyone, because in his mind, such emotions only cause trouble. Charlotte's life is programmed every hour and minute. In the morning, he wakes up early, puts on a neat suit, and enters the office, with big and small decisions waiting for him. Meetings that lasted for hours, fiery negotiations for billions of dollars, all made him feel strong and powerful. But after the office lights went out, when everyone left to go home to their families, Charlotte returned to her splendid but cold mansion. The high walls, the spacious and quiet rooms, all only added to the feeling of emptiness that he never admitted to anyone, not even himself. Charlotte avoids anything that might make him feel weak. He doesn't want to stop to feel his loneliness. He doesn't want to think about the past or the choices he's made. For him, emotions are weak, and strong men will never allow themselves to be bound by such things. But no matter how hard he tried, in the quiet late nights, when only the clock was ticking, Charlotte couldn't help but wonder, had he missed anything in this life? One day, Charlotte received news from Teresa, the faithful maid who had served him for the past 8 years. Teresa announced that she would be leaving because her family wanted to move out to the sea. Teresa was the only person who had been by Charlotte's side for so long. She was like an indispensable part of his large and cold mansion. She took care of the house, prepared meals, and even left small reminders about housework that Charlotte never paid attention to. Despite feeling lost, Charlotte just shrugged and thought that family was a disruptive factor in her life. He said goodbye to Teresa with the usual indifference, as if she were just an ordinary employee. But deep down, he couldn't deny that her departure made him feel empty. Teresa looked at him with sad eyes, trying to explain that life is not only about work, but also about loved ones who need care. She said that family is everything to her, and that she can't give up the people she loves just for work. But Charlotte didn't listen. Those words to him were a challenge to his ideals of life, and he didn't want to admit that he could be wrong. When Teresa left, the mansion seemed emptier and quieter than ever. The moments when Teresa prepared breakfast, set the table, or simply cleaned the living room were now a strange emptiness. Things were not the same, and Charlotte felt uncomfortable. He told himself that he didn't need anyone, that he could easily hire someone to replace Teresa. But the feeling of emptiness remained, silent and irremovable. The nights after Teresa left, Charlotte began to realize that her house was no longer a comfortable haven. He felt a strange emptiness every time he walked in the door. No longer hearing Teresa's soft footsteps, no longer smelling the familiar food every morning. The little things that he never noticed before now become a lingering nostalgia. He didn't want to admit that he missed Teresa, missed the presence of a person in the space that was only him. Charlotte began to feel like she was losing control. He was used to being in control of everything, from work, money, to big and small decisions in life. But the feeling of loss that Teresa's departure brought made him feel helpless, a feeling he had never experienced, or at least deliberately ignored throughout his life. He didn't understand why a maid could make him feel so empty. That's something Charlotte doesn't want to admit, but the truth is that Teresa's departure has made him look at himself and realize the loneliness of his life. Every morning, when he woke up and walked into the empty living room, Charlotte realized that no one was preparing breakfast for him anymore. No one asked him, even with small questions like, "Do you need anything else?" The house now looked like an empty shell, like himself. Successful, rich, powerful, but no one by his side, no one to share with. He had built an empire, but now he could not help but feel that he had built it on the foundation of loneliness. Charlotte began to wonder if she was going in the right direction. Was all that he had tried, all the success he had achieved, really worth it? Teresa's departure shook his firm belief that family and love were just unnecessary constraints. He couldn't help but think about what Teresa had said. Life is not only about work, but also about loved ones who need care. This made Charlotte feel confused and uncertain for the first time in years. When Teresa left, Charlotte not only lost a maid, he also lost the little comfort he never realized he had. Teresa was the last person in this house to bring a bit of warmth to life, and now that she's gone, all that's left is emptiness, coldness. And perhaps that is what Charlotte is really afraid of. The loneliness that he tried to hide with work, with external successes, is now clearly and painfully unavoidable. Sylvia was a girl of about 25, with a humble appearance and a quiet personality. She has warm brown eyes, but in that look Charlotte sees somewhere the inexplicable sadness. Sylvia always tries to complete her work in silence. She never bothers or makes any excessive demands. Her position was like a shadow walking around Charlotte's mansion, never attracting attention. Despite this, Charlotte was always on guard. For him, trust is not easy. After Teresa left, he didn't feel comfortable letting anyone into his life. Charlotte even looked at Sylvia with suspicious eyes. He thought she might be someone sent in to carry out some purpose. Part of Charlotte knew he was probably overthinking it, but he couldn't help it. To test Sylvia's loyalty, Charlotte decided to create a challenging situation. He left the safe containing important documents open to see her reaction. For a few days, Charlotte monitored through the camera to see if she did anything suspicious. But in those videos, he only saw Sylvia silently cleaning, wiping, spending a lot of time in the living room or kitchen to make sure everything was clean and tidy. One day after work, Charlotte turned on the camera to check as usual. But this time, he saw a different scene. Sylvia was standing in front of the bookshelf where he kept many photo albums from the past. Charlotte suddenly felt anxious. He noticed Sylvia opening an old album, slowly flipping through the pages with sad eyes. Her hand stopped at a certain page, then carefully took out a photo. Charlotte couldn't believe her eyes. It was the picture he had taken with Lur, the only woman he had ever truly loved. He sat motionless looking at the screen, his emotions shifting from surprise to anger. He wondered why Sylvia was interested in this photo and what she was going to do with it. There was no sign of greed or theft, but it still made him suspicious. Charlotte decided to confront Sylvia immediately. That evening, Charlotte called Sylvia into the study. He sat behind the large table, his eyes sharp, looking at her. Sylvia walked in, her shoulders trembling slightly as she saw the seriousness on Charlotte's face. Charlotte didn't linger any longer. He immediately asked in a cold tone, "You took the picture in my album. Why did you do that?" Sylvia lowered her head slightly, her eyes filled with water. She took the photo out of her pocket, holding it in her hand with reverence. She faced Charlotte, her voice losing its firmness. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. I just wanted to keep this photo. It means something to me." Charlotte was surprised by Sylvia's answer. He couldn't understand why the photo containing the memory of Lur meant something to her. Why did Sylvia care about his past? Charlotte looked closely at Sylvia's face, as if to find the lie in her eyes, but instead of deceit, he saw a sadness and pain sparkling in them. Charlotte couldn't understand why, but he decided to let go for now. He coldly reminded Sylvia, "You'd better not be curious about things that aren't yours. Your destiny here is just a maid, nothing more." Sylvia silently turned away, but before stepping out the door, she replied in a trembling voice, "I understand, Mr. Charlotte, but I hope you will understand one day too." Sylvia's subtle words made Charlotte feel confused, but in the eyes behind the door, he noticed somewhere a connection between Sylvia and his past. This made Charlotte even more suspicious and curious, but for him, it was all still a slowly unfolding mystery. Charlotte couldn't help but confront Sylvia. He stood in the large living room, the light from the chandelier hanging from the ceiling casting down, creating a tense and cold atmosphere. The expensive paintings hanging on the walls only seemed to add to the distance between people. Charlotte looked at the clock on the wall. The steady ticking of the second hand made the weight even heavier. Charlotte closed her eyes, but her eyes a little worried. It seemed to her that the man had power when Sylvia wouldn't have. The man began closing the shutters. The room was so silent that both of them could hear the wind whistling through the window. Charlotte crossed her arms over her chest, her voice deep and cold. "Sylvia, sit down. I need to talk to you." Sylvia slowly sat down on the chair opposite Charlotte. Her eyes did not leave the man in front of her. He was tall, authoritative, but now there was something soft, hidden behind his deep eyes. Charlotte looked at her for a moment, then said bluntly, "I reviewed the surveillance video. You took the photo from my office. Why did you do that?" His voice was cold, like a judge judging. Sylvia did not lower her head. She looked straight at him and replied, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, I took that picture. I'm sorry, but I have my reasons." Charlotte frowned, her eyes sharp. "Reason? What reason makes you have to sneak like that? Don't tell me you just want to admire it." Sylvia sighed, her eyes sad. "That photo, it has special meaning to me. I know about your past and lures. That photo is part of the story I heard many times as a child. It's not just a memory for you, but for me too." Sylvia's answer made Charlotte pause for a moment. The tension on his face gradually turned into incomprehensible suspicion. He looked deep into Sylvia's eyes, trying to find a sign of a lie, but only saw honesty and sadness. Charlotte took a deep breath, her voice still cold but somewhat softer. "You know about my past and lures? How do you know?" She never told anyone about this." Sylvia lowered her head, her hands on her lap, her fingers clasped tightly as if to restrain her emotions. She whispered, "I know because my mother told me. My mother and Lur used to be best friends. She witnessed everything that happened between you and Lur. She knows all the pain that Lur had to endure when the two of you broke up. I grew up with stories about the love of two people." Charlotte blinked, surprise evident on his face. He didn't think his past could be related to someone so close to Sylvia. The feeling of anxiety suddenly became stronger. He tried to keep his voice calm. "So, what was your purpose in taking the photo? What do you want from me, Sylvia?" Sylvia looked straight at Charlotte, her voice serious. "I don't want anything. I have no intention of threatening or revealing your past. I just want to keep a part of the memory of the story I heard, of the love and loss I felt from my mother's stories. That photo means something to me, as a reminder of what happened." Charlotte was silent. He couldn't read all of Sylvia's thoughts. There was a conflict between reason and emotion in his heart. He wanted to believe that Sylvia had no ill intentions, but the fear of the past being turned over made it difficult for him to remain calm. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. The afternoon sky was gloomy, covered with dark clouds, signaling an impending storm. Charlotte sighed, her voice softened, no longer harsh as before. "I don't know if I can trust you, Sylvia, but I hope you understand. My past is not easy to face. If you really don't intend to hurt me, I hope you will respect what belongs to that past." Sylvia nodded slightly, her voice trembling. "I understand. I just want to know more about the person my mother once loved and told me about. I won't do anything to hurt you, and I'll return the photo if you want." Charlotte turned around, looked at Sylvia for a long time, and then nodded. "You can keep it, but I warn you, never try to go deeper into my past without permission." Sylvia stood up, bowing her head in greeting before leaving the room. Charlotte looked at her, her heart heavy. A part of the past that he thought was buried was now being unearthed, bringing with it some sort of regret. She paused. Half of her face held silence, the part resting on the neck. She felt her lungs, and breath gasped to slow sips. After a moment, She returned the glass, holding it under her arm. The long repressed feelings about Lur suddenly returned, like a storm sweeping away all the peace that Charlotte had tried to build. That night, sitting alone in the large but cold room, Charlotte felt extremely empty. The memory of Lur appeared as clear as yesterday. He remembered the happy days with her, the moments when the two of them stood side by side to overcome all the challenges of life, full of laughter and trust in each other. They planned for the future together, dreaming of a simple but cozy wedding, where only close friends and family would be together. He remembered Lur's smile, a smile full of joy and love, dispelling all fatigue after stressful working hours. Her eyes, lit up with concern and sacrifice, never showed complaint or disappointment. This made Charlotte appreciate Lur even more, but at the same time, it also made him even more painful when he thought about the past. He knew Lur had sacrificed a lot for his career, had given up personal desires, just to be by his side. She was the source of encouragement, the haven for Charlotte to return to every time she was tired of life, but he didn't appreciate that. Then Charlotte's career opportunity exploded, opening up a career path that he couldn't miss. It was an opportunity for Charlotte to assert her name in the financial market, an opportunity to reach the heights she had always longed for. He clearly remembered the moment when he sat with Lur in the small cafe, where he told her about postponing the wedding. Lur listened silently, her eyes fixed on the cup of coffee in front of her, without looking directly at him. Finally, she just smiled slightly, nodded, and said she understood. Her silence that day was something Charlotte could never forget. She did not object, did not complain, just silently accepted. But in her eyes, though the smile was still on her lips, Charlotte knew something had changed. Her belief in their love, perhaps, had begun to waver. He felt heartbroken when he remembered the times he missed dinners with her, but chased work. The long trips he promised to make up for but then forgot. Each time he broke his promise, Lur would silently smile and accept. She never complained, never asked for anything from him. But it was precisely because of that silence that Charlotte felt even more remorseful. Then one day, without any warning, Lur quietly left. She didn't leave a goodbye, not a message, not a word of reproach. Charlotte returned home after a long meeting and found the house strangely empty. There was no familiar laughter, no smell of the dinner Lur used to cook for him. There was only a terrifying silence and a short letter on the kitchen table. Lur didn't explain, just wrote that she had to leave, to find herself, to find a life that wasn't waiting and sacrifice in vain. Charlotte held that letter for hours, her hands shaking and her eyes blurring with tears. He realized that he had lost the most important woman in his life, the one who had always been by his side, no matter the difficulties or challenges. But now, when he had all the success he had ever dreamed of, he realized that it all meant nothing without Lur by his side. The memory of Lur is a never-ending pain. It was the moments when he blamed himself for being too ambitious, for letting his career overshadow other precious things in life. The long, lonely nights, the successful but tasteless days and months made him realize one thing. Lur's love and sacrifice were not something he could find from numbers or contracts, but the only thing he had let slip away forever. And now Charlotte only had tormented memories, the pain that could not be soothed, just because he did not know how to appreciate the love Lur had for him. He knew there was no way to turn back time, no way to change what had happened, but those memories will always be a part of him, reminding him of the price of ambition and what he lost in his life. One day, on a gloomy afternoon, Charlotte was working in the office with a series of calls from clients and partners. While he was focused on an online meeting, his personal phone suddenly rang. He was a little annoyed by the ringing interrupting his work, but when he saw the caller's name, Lur, his heart skipped a beat. It had been a long time since he had heard from her. Charlotte's mind immediately drifted back to the past, to the happy days and sweet moments they had shared. Charlotte quickly left the meeting room, closing the door to ensure privacy. He picked up the phone, his voice trembling slightly. "Lur?" On the other end of the line, Lur's voice was soft but firm, carrying something like an echo from the past. "Charlotte, I'm calling just to let you know that I've fallen in love with someone else. I think that it's time for me to end our relationship so we can both move on. I don't want us to cling to the past forever." Charlotte's whole world seemed to collapse at that moment. He felt all his strength drained. His legs seemed to no longer be steady. Lur's words echoed in his mind, shattering all the hopes he had never acknowledged. Deep down, Charlotte always had a silent belief that one day, when he achieved enough success, when things settled down, he would be able to return to Lur and rebuild what was lost. But now, what he always thought he was in control of suddenly vanished. Charlotte couldn't utter a word. His throat tightened. A feeling of emptiness and pain spread. After a few seconds of silence, he could only reply weakly, "I understand, Lur. I wish you happiness." That blessing was like a knife cutting deep into his heart, but Charlotte knew it was the best he could do for Lur at the moment. She had chosen her path, and he had no right to hold her back. After that call, Charlotte collapsed into the chair, his head in his hands. Memories of Lur flooded back like an uncontrollable flow. He remembered the times they sat together under the night sky, talking about dreams, about the future they would build together. He remembered Lur's smiles, her eyes every time she looked at him, full of love and trust. Now, all that remains is emptiness, regret, and indescribable pain. He had lost the only woman he had ever loved, and all because of his choice. After Lur left, Charlotte tried to stay calm, but inside him was a big void that nothing could fill. He returned to work as a way to escape reality. Every morning he woke up, he forced himself to walk into the office, plunging into projects and huge financial numbers. Hours-long meetings, big contracts he won. It was all just his way of seeking a sense of accomplishment, to ease the pain of loss. He thought that by putting all his mind to work, he could forget the past, forget the image of Lur. Charlotte's work grew stronger. He became a powerful man in the financial industry, famous for his sharp negotiation skills and risky decisions. In the eyes of outsiders, he was a successful man. Nothing could shake his determination. But inside, Charlotte knew that he was just building a big wall around himself, trying to hide his loneliness and hurt. Every evening, after leaving the office, Charlotte returned to her large and cold mansion. The house was now emptier than ever. Teresa, the old maid, was gone, and Lur was no longer in his life. Dinners alone in the big room, long nights awake with a glass of wine in hand, Charlotte felt like an empty shell, with nothing left to hope for or expect. Occasionally he wondered if the success he had achieved was really worth it. He had traded love, traded personal happiness for status and power. But all he got in return was loneliness and alienation. Every time he looked in the mirror, he no longer recognized himself. A cold face, empty eyes. He realized that he had become a different person, a person he no longer loved. One day, after a meeting that lasted until late at night, Charlotte drove home on the familiar road. He drove through the brightly lit streets, but it felt like walking in the dark. Suddenly, he saw a young couple holding hands walking on the sidewalk, both laughing, their eyes full of joy and happiness. That sight made his heart ache. That's what he and Lur used to have, what he let slip away. That night, Charlotte couldn't sleep. He sat on the balcony looking out at the city under the sparkling yellow lights. He remembered Lur's voice in the last call, remembering how firmly she announced that she'd found someone new. He understood that she deserved happiness with someone who could be by her side, not someone who always put work first. Faced with loneliness and lost, Charlotte gradually realized that she could not continue to live like this. Work could not fill the void in his heart, and great successes could not replace the love and connection he had lost. He needs to change, not for anyone else, but for himself. Charlotte decided to change her lifestyle. He started cutting back on work, spending more time for himself. He started taking walks in the morning, spending time reading, and even trying to take an art class. These things, though small, helped him gradually find some peace in his heart. He also started thinking about the people around him, the people he had ignored, because he was too focused on his career. He called a few old friends, started attending small meetings, and tried to learn to be more open. Although these things could not immediately ease the pain, it helped him feel that he still had a chance to change, to find the true meaning of life. Charlotte knew that the road ahead was still long and difficult. He knew he couldn't change everything overnight. But he also understood that if he didn't start now, he would never have a chance to find himself and find the happiness he had lost. And he was determined to walk, step by step, on that path. Late one evening, after having enough evidence of Sylvia's curiosity about his past, Charlotte decided to confront her. He couldn't continue to ignore the signs that Sylvia was involved in a part of the memory he had tried to bury. Charlotte sat in the living room, the dim yellow light shining on his face, full of anxiety. When Sylvia entered, she recognized the tension in the air. "Sylvia, I need to talk to you," Charlotte began, his voice not hiding the tension. Sylvia stood still, her hands unconsciously clutching the corner of her shirt. She knew this confrontation would come sooner or later. Charlotte looked directly at Sylvia, his eyes sharp but also full of confusion. "Why do you care about my past? Why did you take that picture?" Charlotte asked, her voice laden with suspicion and worry. Sylvia sighed, as if she had held these emotions in her heart for too long, and now, with no other choice, had to speak. "Because of that picture. Because it's a part of my life that you never knew," Sylvia replied, her voice soft but firm. Charlotte frowned, not understanding the meaning of those words. "Lure is my mother," Sylvia said, her voice trembling but her eyes unwavering. The words were like a bolt from the blue to Charlotte. He looked at Sylvia. For a moment, he was completely stunned. Sylvia's words tore apart a part of the past that he had tried to forget. A part that he'd never expected to return and appear right in front of him. "Your mother is Lure?" Charlotte stammered, her voice losing its usual composure. He looked into Sylvia's eyes, and at that moment he realized those eyes were all too familiar. Bing Kinger's sad eyes, full of loneliness. Like Lure's eyes the day he left to pursue his career. He couldn't believe Lure was pregnant with Sylvia without him knowing. Charlotte felt her heart tighten, as if all the air in the room suddenly disappeared. Sylvia continued, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "My mother told me about you, but not the beautiful stories. She said you were the one who abandoned her when she needed you most. My mother had to endure everything alone, raising me up in hardship and pain. You never came back, not once. Asked, not once tried to find out. You abandoned my mother for your career, and so she had to endure a lonely and difficult life." Charlotte slumped down in his chair, unable to maintain his usual strength. Sylvia's anger and pain were like knives stabbing into his heart. He felt like a coward who had shirked his responsibilities without realizing that his decision had caused so much pain to Lure and Sylvia. He didn't know how to answer, because the truth was too harsh, and he had no excuse. He looked at Sylvia, seeing Lure's figure present through the young girl's eyes. It was the sadness and loneliness that Lure once had, and now continues to exist in Sylvia. I don't know," Charlotte said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know your mother was pregnant. If I had known, maybe things would have been different." Sylvia shook her head, her voice firm. "But you didn't know, because you never tried to find out. You let your career take over everything, and my mother had to pay for it. I'm not here to harm you, but to let you know that there are things in this life that you can't go back and fix. You can be successful at work, but you failed my mother, and me too." Charlotte felt a deep pain in her heart. He had always believed that he was in control of everything, but now he had to face the fact that he had lost the most important thing in his life. Uncontrollable tears began to fall, and Charlotte felt like a wave of regret had hit. He knew there would be no way to make up for the lost years, but perhaps the only way to move forward was to try to fix what was left. "Sylvia, I can't change the past, but I want to make it up to you. I want to be the father you never had. I know I don't deserve it, but if you give me a chance." Charlotte looked up at Sylvia, her eyes filled with hope and sadness. Sylvia was silent, looking at the man in front of her. She didn't know if she could forgive, but she saw sincerity in Charlotte's eyes. She sighed, "I'll think about it." But you have to understand, forgiveness doesn't come immediately. It takes time. And, just like my mother once did, I don't want to have to endure another disappointment." Charlotte nodded, his heart heavy but also with a glimmer of hope. This was the first time he had truly felt the meaning of love and responsibility, and he knew he would have to try his best to make up for the losses he had caused. Sylvia sat opposite Charlotte in the large but cold living room. She began to recount the story of the difficult years that her mother, Lur, had to go through after leaving him. Sylvia's eyes were full of reproach and bitterness as she recalled that time, memories that for her were full of deprivation and pain. Sylvia said that Lur had to struggle to raise her alone without any support from Charlotte. After Lur left Charlotte's life, she had to face a future that was not easy. The odd jobs, the sleepless nights worrying about the future of the two of them, and the silent tears at night when Lur thought Sylvia was fast asleep. Lur tried her best to give Sylvia a decent life, but could not hide her own fatigue and despair. Sylvia recalled moments when she was young, seeing her mother cry silently in the kitchen after returning from her day job. She saw her mother trying her best for her, but she also clearly saw the never-ending pain of lost love. Lur never spoke directly to Sylvia about Charlotte, but whenever Sylvia asked about her father, Lur just frowned and looked away, as if the memory of him was a difficult wound to heal. Then one day, when Sylvia was old enough to understand, Lur told her about Charlotte. Lur's voice was full of bitterness when she mentioned Charlotte, whom she called a coward who chose to give up love for a career. Lur felt that Charlotte was not courageous enough to face the difficulties in love and family, but instead chose the easier path, leaving everything behind to seek personal success. These words made Sylvia grow up with the image of a distant father, a man she had never met, but had made her mother suffer. Charlotte sat and listened without saying a word. Every word of Sylvia was like a knife cutting into his heart. He remembered his decisions, the times he had chosen work over love, and now faced the consequences of those choices. He felt pain not only from the loss of Lur, but also from Sylvia's resentment, the daughter he never knew but had suffered deep wounds from his actions. Sylvia looked straight into Charlotte's eyes, her voice cold and determined. "My mother always said that you'd never deserved her love," she said, "and I think she was right." These words made Charlotte feel defeated. He knew there were no excuses enough to change the past. He had given up on Lur, and now he had to face the consequences of his choice. Charlotte bowed his head. Regret piled up. He realized that he had not only lost Lur, but also lost the opportunity to love and care for his daughter. He understood that he had caused irreparable pain, and now, to fix it all, he needed to find a way to help Sylvia and let her feel the love he had missed for so many years. Charlotte decided to see Lur again. He couldn't go on living with unanswered questions, with the persistent remorse clinging to his soul. He wanted to look directly into Lur's eyes, to hear her tell him what had happened and why everything ended so bitterly. He needed to know, not to erase the past, but to understand and seek forgiveness for himself. One day, Sylvia and Charlotte decided to go see Lur together to resolve any misunderstandings. But when they arrived, they discovered that Lur had died in a traffic accident many years earlier when Sylvia was a child. This truth was like a knife stabbing straight into Charlotte's heart, making him stunned and losing all ability to react. Standing in front of Lur's grave, he felt the pain and regret to the fullest, an emotion that never in his successful life could have prepared him for. He looked at Lur's tombstone, her name engraved with simple but deeply meaningful words. All the memories rushed back. The smiles, the caresses, and the promises never fulfilled. Charlotte remembered the last time he saw Lur, her eyes no longer sparkling, but instead a deep sadness, something he was too busy with his career to realize. Charlotte felt her heart sink in regret. He had missed the opportunity to love the woman he had promised to take care of for life, and now, when he wanted to fix it, it was too late. He blamed himself, wondering if he could go back in time, if he could choose differently. This feeling was not only regret, but also endless pain for his inattention. Sylvia, standing next to him, could not hold back her tears. She cried not only because her mother was gone, but also because of the years she had to grow up without a father. She understood that her mother had tried her best to give her a better life, but Charlotte's absence left a void that could not be filled. Sylvia looked at Charlotte, not with the angry eyes she had before, but with eyes of loss and understanding. She understood that Charlotte was also a victim of loneliness and wrong choices. Both Charlotte and Sylvia couldn't hold back their tears. They stood in front of Lur's grave, holding hands, feeling the shared pain, a pain that no words could describe. Lur's passing left a void in their hearts that nothing could fill. The pain and regret now became a burden in their hearts, and above all it was a reminder of the important things they had missed. Charlotte knew that he would never be able to apologize to Lur, but he still had Sylvia, the daughter who was all that remained of lost love, and he wouldn't lose her again. Charlotte realized that he had missed so many important things in his life. What he pursued, the big contracts, the huge profits, now all become meaningless when he faces the truth that what really matters has slipped away from him. Charlotte felt the emptiness in her heart, the loneliness that he had created for himself when he was preoccupied with frivolous things. Standing in front of Lur's grave, Charlotte made a decision. He needed to stop. He needed to live a different life, a more meaningful life, with the people he loved. He looked at Sylvia, the girl standing next to him with a shy but resilient look. That was his daughter, the daughter he never knew, who had endured so much lack of fatherly love. Charlotte felt he had to make it up to her. He wanted to be a real father, a father Sylvia could rely on, trust, and love. He wanted to rebuild what he had missed, to build a real relationship with his daughter. He promised Sylvia that he would make it up to her, that he would be the father she could trust and love. For Charlotte, this was the last chance to right the wrongs of the past and find the true meaning of life. Sylvia looked at him, her eyes containing both suspicion and hope. She had been through so much pain, but she also realized that Charlotte was trying, that he was changing. Charlotte started to change, step by step. He cut back on work, spent time with Sylvia, took her for walks, had dinner with her, and cared about the little things in her life. The first conversations were awkward, but gradually, Sylvia began to open up more. She began to tell him about her mother, about the memories she had with Lur, about the unfinished dreams. In each of Sylvia's stories, Charlotte understands more about Lur, about what she went through and what he lost. He realized that life is not only about career and success, but also about peaceful moments with loved ones. Charlotte decided not to let anything important pass her by again. He had missed so much, but with Sylvia, he still had a chance to make amends, to love and truly live with the things that mattered most. Charlotte began to rebuild her relationship with Sylvia. Initially, this relationship was not easy, as Sylvia still held a lot of resentment. The years of living without a father and having to witness her mother's pain left deep wounds that were difficult to heal. Every time she met Charlotte, Sylvia felt a mixture of anger and a desire to be loved. She couldn't forget the pain her mother had to endure, and Charlotte also understood that regaining her daughter's trust was a long and arduous road. However, with perseverance and sincerity, Charlotte never stopped trying. He started with small things, loving gestures and sincere care. He took Sylvia for walks on weekend afternoons, stopped by small roadside shops and asked about her life. Charlotte listened to everything Sylvia said, from her unfinished dreams to her petty worries about work in the future. He was no longer the cold man who only knew about contracts or profits, but became a father with a desire to make up for his daughter. Gradually, Sylvia opened up more to Charlotte. There were nights when the two of them sat together, drinking hot tea and sharing memories of Lur. Charlotte told Sylvia about the joys and sorrows between him and Lur, about the moments he loved her so much and about the mistakes he had made. Sylvia listened with a calmness, and sometimes she also told about the beautiful memories she still had of her mother. Those conversations helped father and daughter understand each other better, and Charlotte realized that true love is not something that can be measured or sought through work, but rather the peace of mind when you are with the people you love. One day, Charlotte decided to do something he had never dared to do in years. He took Sylvia to Lur's grave. They stood in front of the grave with fresh flowers in their hands. and Charlotte spoke to Lur the words he had never dared to say. An apology from the bottom of his heart. Sylvia also cried, not only for the loss of her mother, but also because she felt the change from her father. They stood there for a long time, in silence, but full of emotion, as if they had finally found peace for themselves. After months of trying, Charlotte and Sylvia started a new life. Charlotte decided to cut back on work, moving from the large, cold mansion to a smaller but cozier house. This house has no cold walls or spacious rooms that no one enters. Instead, it has a small living room where they can watch movies together, a small garden for Sylvia to grow flowers, and a kitchen for both of them to cook on weekends. Sylvia gradually felt the change from her father. Charlotte no longer rushed headlong into meetings or tense negotiations. Instead, he learned to stop to enjoy the moments with his daughter. Every morning, Charlotte woke up earlier to prepare breakfast for Sylvia, and in the evening, they had dinner together and shared stories of the day. For Sylvia, these things had never happened during her childhood, and that was what made her feel warm and happy. Although the relationship with Lur could not be restored, Charlotte still felt forgiveness from herself and from Sylvia. Memories of Lur always live in their hearts, but instead of sadness, they have become beautiful memories, valuable lessons about love and sacrifice. They couldn't go back to the way they were, but at least they found peace. Charlotte also began to participate in charitable activities, partly because she wanted to contribute to the community, and partly because he wanted to do something to honor Lur. Those who knew Charlotte all noticed a marked change in him, no longer the man who only knew success, but a devoted father and a person who knew how to love and share. I cannot believe Charlotte didn't realize that whoever she embraced also would become who they became. Magus hena gotimener, ito makus anohosa. Finally, Charlotte realized that true happiness lies not in what he gained from work or fame, but from love, sharing and caring for each other. He had missed so many important things in life, but Charlotte knew that he still had a chance to make amends, to love, and to live meaningfully. Charlotte, along with Sylvia, found happiness in simple things. Sunday mornings together went to the park, where they took the dog Sylvia had just adopted, running and playing. Family meals with dishes that were sometimes clumsy but full of laughter. The time spent watching the sunset together from the small garden behind the house, and the late-night stories under the starry sky. Charlotte no longer felt lonely and empty as before. He had learned the most valuable lesson of his life. Only when he put family and love first could he truly feel true happiness. The stressful and pressured days of the past had become a thing of the past. Now he lives for the present, for the people he loves. He knew that no one could replace Lur, and his love for her would always exist. But Charlotte also understood that love does not always come to a happy ending, and sometimes learning to accept loss and continue to love is the most important thing. He loved Sylvia, and by all means, he would make up for everything he had missed. Charlotte was determined never to let work or anything else take over his love and time for Sylvia again. Finally, under the warm sunset, Charlotte felt true happiness, happiness that did not come from fame or money, but from the people he loved and was willing to do anything to protect. And that was something he would never give up again.